The Defense Department saw many changes this year, with new initiatives and programs across all the services. We take a look at the biggest defense stories of the year with Howard Altman. He's Senior Managing Editor of Military Times, and Valerie Insinna, a reporter at Breaking Defense. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Howard, I want to start with you because I would think that the biggest defense story this year was the massive pullout from Afghanistan.
Well, clearly it was a huge story ending 20 years of U.S. presence in Afghanistan. It ended on a very chaotic note. At the end, 13 U.S. troops were killed in an attack, and there's still a continuing issue of Afghan allies left behind. Every day my phone blows up with people seeking to get out. So that story is not really even over. A big concern is how does the U.S. conduct over-the-horizon attacks.
Counterterrorism.
Without a presence there, as you saw on the August 29th attack in Kabul that killed 10 civilians. That is not an easy task, and it's going to remain to be a difficult task as moving forward.
Of course, now Russia is moving troops along the border with Ukraine. That's also a very big story.
Well, it still remains to be seen. The Ukraine military recently told me that there's 120,000 Russian troops aligned around the border. Their head of the Defense Intelligence Agency told me a few weeks back that the Russians are preparing for an attack in the end of next month, beginning of February timeframe. It's still unknown what Putin's going to do. The U.S. is not anticipating having any troops involved in that. There's been no troop movements, ahead of anything. The government said, the Biden administration said it's going to be relying mostly on economic sanctions and other kinds of pressure.
And then, of course, China, the possibility of them moving aggressively against Taiwan in some way.
Well, that's a big concern. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin recently spoke at the Reagan National Defense Forum and talked about how recent Chinese maneuvers, military maneuvers around Taiwan resemble a rehearsal for invasion. So that's a big ongoing issue. Whether that happens is also unknown.
Valerie, what about you? What have you seen from coming out of the Pentagon as far as the biggest story for 2021?
So I think one of the biggest stories is the transition that we're seeing playing out, obviously, from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. We have a lot of new officials that have come in over the past year, a lot still that need to get confirmed. And, we're seeing the pandemic recede. And at the same time, I think there's a big question about what does the national defense strategy look like? Does there remain this still huge, intense focus on China? I think so far we've seen, officials say, we're still looking at China. This is our pacing threat. But we're moving towards an era where budgets are going to be very flat. There's going to be a lot of competition within the services, within, the different parts of the department. So I think next year is going to be the real bellwether where we're going to see what does the Biden administration DOD look like.
You mentioned the pandemic, and of course with the pandemic we got the vaccine and vaccine mandates across the services and federal contractors.
Yes, and it's been really interesting over the past couple of weeks. Last week we saw a federal judge in Georgia who passed a nationwide injunction. So kind of the latest on that is that the Defense Department has directed contracting officers to kind of hold off on the implementation of the vaccine mandate for federal contractors. We're still seeing the mandate play out for the services, but I think a big question is, does this come back for contractors? Does that requirement, continue to fetter out among the major defense companies? And I don't think there's a good answer there right now.
And we are seeing some people being let go from the services for refusing the mandate.
Absolutely, and I mean, that's something that the department has warned about. I think that, that is a story that will continue to play out until next year, and we will have to kind of keep our finger on the pulse to see, how many people leave, where are we losing talent, and, are there any sort of legal challenges or any sort of political challenges that come as a result of this?
Howard, I want to ask you about Iran, because it seems like that's been quiet this year.
Well, it's been in the background as the nuclear negotiations are still taking place. There's still a great deal of concern about what Iran may do. The Israelis are pushing for action. And you've seen a change in U.S. Central Command that Israel's now a part of it, and they're actually meeting with Arab nations, which is, many years ago would have been unprecedented. So they're still a great deal of concern. And as U.S. has ended its combat mission in Iraq officially, it's been that way since 2020, but there's still Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, so it remains to be seen what kind of tensions continue to exist.
And of course, we're under a continuing resolution. In general, in the government, impacts. What are you seeing with that?
Well, of course, when you're under a continuing resolution, you cannot start new programs. The pay raise for troops can't really go into effect. That's something that Secretary Austin has sort of talked about quite a bit. But I think, what we're seeing that sort of seems different is, this is extending all the way into February. That's normally the time where we would see another budget come out. So I think we could see dovetailing impacts there. And of course, there's a huge question of what happens if Congress, gets to February and they still don't come up with an appropriations deal. That could set a lot of programs back. Just because they're not able to ramp up production, they're not able to ramp up development activities. So it kind of, even if we see the department sort of try to move forward technologically to take the steps that they need to take to deter China, if they have the same budget as they did last year, they might be hampered, trying to do that.
Okay, so I'll ask you both. Valerie, you go first. What's your prediction for the biggest story that we're going to see out of the Pentagon for next year?
Well, I think for me, I'm going to be watching the National Defense Strategy. How serious is it about taking China, and what steps does the department want to take to implement it? And I think then, I'm going to be looking at the budget and asking, where are you putting the money to do this, to accomplish this strategy? And if you don't see those things combined, I think you've kind of got just an empty strategy that doesn't really do anything. So that's definitely one thing I'll be watching.
Okay, Howard, what about you?
Well, I guarantee you, if there's a China invasion of Taiwan, or if there's a Russian invasion of Ukraine, those will be the biggest stories of the year.
All right, Howard and Valerie, thank you so much. We'll be watching, and I'll hold you to those predictions.
Thank you.